During the spring of 2000, in southern Florida, a group of amateur divers were exploring one of their favorite sites in the moonlight. Suddenly, they saw the silhouette of a fish in the beam of light, a fish no one had ever seen in the waters of the Atlantic. This unknown fish wasn't alone. The surprised divers discovered that there were many of them. One of the divers believed these were lionfish, but she wasn't certain. Lionfish come from Asia, and until now, no one had ever spotted any in American waters. To confirm her suspicion, the diver called the research center of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in Beaufort, North Carolina. She described what she saw to Paula Whitfield, a marine biologist, and was told that she had probably made a mistake.
I just couldn't believe it. It was like seeing, I don't know, a kangaroo in North America.
The diver hadn't made a mistake. Pterois volitans, or lionfish, is a scorpion fish indigenous to the Pacific and Indian Oceans that did in fact travel to the Atlantic coast of the United States at the end of the 20th century. In its native habitat, the lionfish is just a predator amongst many, but here in the Atlantic, it has become the terror of the sea. It devours everything in its path, even the youngest of fish. It feeds on the larvae of shrimp and lobster. In the mangroves or in the reefs, it gobbles up its fellow predators before they're big enough to attack it. Marine life suffers wherever the lionfish flourishes, and the tropical reefs are quickly becoming deserted. In 10 years, the lionfish has conquered a massive territory at a horrifying speed. Scientists call it the worst invader on the planet. How did the lionfish arrive in the Atlantic? Its natural habitat is thousands of miles away. The answer can perhaps be found off the coast of North Carolina, 3 hours by boat from the Beaufort Research Center. Dr. James Morris from the National Ocean Service has thoroughly studied Pterois volitans. This fisherman's son has taken the matter of the lionfish to heart. Dr. Morris and his team of volunteers are on the way to the wreck of the Neko to capture a large number of living specimens. This way he can continue to study the species in his laboratory and hope to solve the mystery of this invasion.
So we're here on a shipwreck diving site here off the coast of North Carolina, and this is a site that we've been collecting a number of lionfish over the years. These fish that the divers are bringing up today, we're going to be using for research at our laboratory.
The Neko is a German cargo ship that sank over 100 years ago in the Gulf Stream, the current that forms in the Caribbean Sea and moves up towards the North Atlantic. James Morris's volunteers must be able to handle the strength of the current. In North Carolina, the Gulf Stream is practically an underwater river running along the coast at a speed of 6 to 10 miles per hour. If a diver gets caught in the current, he will miss the wreck and may find himself stranded amongst the bull sharks that circle the zone. The warm waters of the Gulf Stream are ideal for underwater life. James Morris sends his team to dive around the Neko regularly because he knows that they will find many lionfish, particularly big ones. Thanks to the abundant food, many specimens in the area reach the species' maximum size, about 16 inches. But don't be fooled by its size. Pterois volitans is the dominating species around the Neko. With each passing day, it leaves less and less room for its competitors. Although the lionfish is not a good swimmer, it's difficult to capture it alive without hurting it. Diving at a depth of 145 feet is a considerable strain on the heart and the body. The divers must therefore economize their energy in order to avoid tiring too quickly. They must also watch out for the fish's poison spines. The sting is extremely painful, and the suffering is so intense that it can provoke a serious diving accident with terrible consequences. The team has captured 30 specimens. This should be enough for the laboratory. It's now time to surface, because at this depth, the oxygen gets used up very quickly. These dives seldom last more than a half hour. Back on the boat, the captured fish are immediately transferred to a tank containing seawater.
That's a good haul, that one. Yeah. Big female here.
There's a big difference in pressure between the depths and the surface. The fish haven't had time to decompress, and their bellies are swollen with air. To keep them alive, James Morris pierces their swim bladder with a hollow needle. The air is able to escape, and the fish quickly returns to normal.
There we go.
Back at the Beaufort Research Center, James Morris transfers the fish into pools filled with continually recycled seawater. This will be their temporary home. Several of the fish captured at the Neko wreck are dissected the very next day. Their DNA will be analyzed. The systematic comparative analysis of the DNA of all the lionfish collected in this region of the Atlantic should lead the research team back to the original strain. They'll then be able to understand how the species arrived here and to locate where the invasion began.
Marking them in terms of...
Professor Thomas Schultz, a geneticist at Duke University in North Carolina, has been in charge of this study since the lionfish first appeared in the area.
So using the genetic tools and these molecular markers that we're seeing here, these genetic polymorphisms, one of the things that we're hoping to be able to tell is how many fish were originally introduced into the east coast of the United States. So, you know, when you look at two fish and they look morphologically to be very similar, you can't distinguish whether or not those fish came from the same parents or not. And so using these genetic polymorphisms, we can actually look at the amount of genetic diversity that's present in these invading populations and try to track back to see what's the minimum number of fish that were introduced into the United States initially.
Genetics research shows that we have a very few number of lionfish that were introduced into the Atlantic. Probably fewer than 10, which was introduced into the United States, likely from the aquarium trade. It is a very popular aquarium species that is imported into the U.S. from Indonesia, from the Philippines. We know that many thousands of lionfish have been imported into the United States in the last decade.
Thanks to the work done by Dr. James Morris and Professor Thomas Schultz, we now know how the lionfish arrived in the waters of the Atlantic. It all began In Florida, at the end of the 20th century, during the 80s. In Miami's and Palm Beach's famous luxury seafront apartments, exotic fish aficionados decided that their lionfish didn't really belong in the family aquarium. They didn't have the heart to kill them, so they released them into the nearby ocean waters below.
The reason lionfish were introduced is still not clear, and we know that is a bad idea. And there are many outreach campaigns and efforts to try to inform the public about the impacts of releasing your pets into the wild.
One might assume that the specimens set free in Florida, so far from their natural habitat, would still stand little chance of surviving. Not only did they survive, but they multiplied at a startling rate and set out to conquer the Western Atlantic simultaneously on two fronts. In the south, near the Gulf of Mexico and the Bahamas. In the north, near Georgia and near southern North Carolina. Once it had conquered the Caribbean and Central America, the lionfish found its way to South America.
So there are many different aspects of lionfish life history and their biology and ecology that have really allowed this invasion to progress and for lionfish to become one of the most aggressive invaders on the planet.
In the Bahamas, the deterioration of the marine ecosystem is so disturbing that the government has decided to take on the lionfish. Marine Resources Services have launched a program to research and combat the lionfish. Nicola Smith, a researcher in marine biology at the University of Nassau, heads this initiative.
And Jason, you don't have defog either?
Nicola, along with her assistant Skylar Miller, chose the island of Eleuthera to the east of the archipelago as the experimentation base. Their mission is to establish a combat protocol. The first phase of the protocol consists of determining to what extent the lionfish has colonized the island's reefs. Nicola and her team have established a study perimeter. From there, square foot by square foot, the team will inventory all the different species of fish in the selected zone. The results are even more alarming than expected. The lionfish is everywhere. It occupies every crevice and every hole. Not only that, but many naturally occurring species like the surgeonfish, the grouper, or the parrotfish have all but disappeared.
I'm very worried about the future of marine ecosystems in the Bahamas because of the lionfish invasion. Are we going to have reefs dominated by lots of lionfish with very few native species? This can have impacts for commercial fisheries and recreational diving, and of course just the ecology of coral reef fish, where you're going to get dominance by one species.
How did the lionfish eliminate all other species so quickly and so completely? Dr. Justin Grubich studies the kinematics of underwater predators. He works on the physical structure of fish and their movements. These factors can then determine their efficiency as predators. Understanding how the lionfish captures its prey will give us insight into the predatory mechanism. The speed at which the predator swallows its prey isn't visible to the naked eye, nor to an everyday video camera filming at 25 frames per second. Justin Grubich's research requires special equipment that can only be used in a laboratory setting. This lionfish was captured 2 weeks ago. It was immediately placed in an aquarium where it adjusted to captivity, bathed in a calming red light. Justin Grubich has been feeding it with tweezers. This lengthy protocol is coming to an end, and the scientists can now film the predatory act with a high-speed camera. Justin gives it a shrimp, and the camera records it all at a speed of 2,000 frames per second.
Here we have a fantastic strike of a lionfish. Lionfish are unique among fish predators in that they have incredibly protrusible jaws. They use suction to generate a suction pulse of water that draws the prey into the mouth. The human eye sees at about 30 hertz. That means at about 0.33 milliseconds. And you can see here by this time stamp that this behavior of striking at the prey is occurring in 1/3 of the time that the human eye can perceive. And you'll see here that the jaw actually protrudes over 40% of, almost 40% of its head length. And when it reaches its maximum jaw protrusion, it expands its head from the side, and it what basically like sucking through a straw, it sucks in the prey.
Experience tells us that the lionfish achieves complete jaw protrusion in 10 milliseconds and sucks in the shrimp in 14 milliseconds. The predatory act lasts a total of 24 milliseconds.
When we think about kinematics of how the jaws in fishes work, you got to keep in mind that the skeleton of a fish, or the skull of a fish rather, the skull of a fish is actually made up of over 20 different bones. So here we have a skeleton made by a colleague of mine, Steve Husky, and you can see how intricately aligned all the different bones are in the head of a lionfish.
A digital 3D image reveals the complex movements of the 20 skull bones working together to make the predator's jaw protrude.
Now, when we compare this lionfish to other predators that have been examined using this kind of kinematic analysis, we see that it falls out about 3rd place among all fishes in terms of the amount of jaw protrusion it can generate. The all-time champion, of course, is Epibulus insidiator, known as the sling jaw wrasse, which is also common in the Red Sea. Here we have a cichlid known as Petinia splendida. It's a South American species that is found in the freshwater Amazon region. And then we have the lionfish. Among marine fishes, it's very, very effective in terms of how it can feed on its prey.
The lionfish's prey doesn't stand a chance. The lionfish feeds all the time. Understanding the amount of food he consumes each day will help evaluate the scope of his predatory power.
And making it thin. So like you can make a sheet of water.
James Morris has calculated the daily amount of food the lionfish needs.
Release the gas that's bound, that's supersaturated.
One of the fish captured in the Neko has been put in a respirometer, a chamber containing circulating reservoir water.
Being pumped through the chamber and into a
By measuring the
reservoir,
oxygen
and we're
dissolved in
measuring
the fresh water as it
dissolved
enters and
oxygen
exits the
content of
chamber,
water.
it's possible
As
to
the water
calculate how
passes through
much
the
oxygen
chamber,
the lionfish has
as the
used up.
lionfish is respiring and it's removing oxygen
From there,
the water
a
as part of the
biological model of the
respiration
species can be
process.
created
So if
once
we're
the
able to
food
measure the
consumption
water
factor
coming,
is
the
subtracted.
oxygen levels of the water coming into the chamber and the oxygen levels of the water exiting the chamber. So we've learned that lionfish can consume as high as 6% of their body weight per day over time at some of the higher temperatures. And when calculating that feeding rate, we've learned that it can have quite an impact on the fish community. In some cases, lionfish can remove a considerable biomass of small forage fishes and can even deplete that biomass, causing change to the reef fish community, including biodiversity and forage base that we know is really important for commercially important species like snapper and grouper.
This fish is especially voracious.
On his fins
This
and his
huge
body.
appetite
Yeah.
transposed onto a 165-pound man would represent over 10 pounds of food per day. Back in the Bahamas, at the Eleuthera Reef, Nicholas Smith and her team have begun the second phase of their protocol. The idea is to determine whether lionfish eradication in a specific zone will have an impact on the overall marine population. all the lionfish have been mercilessly eliminated. Now the specified observation zone is clean. There isn't one single lionfish in this reference zone. From this moment onwards, the zone is watched closely. Nicola and her team will find out how much time it takes for the colony's population level to return to where it was prior to the cleaning. Once they have this information, they will know at what rate to eradicate the lionfish in a given zone in order to have an effect on repopulation. It's all about controlling the invasion. The baby fish, only a few days or a few weeks old, look quite inoffensive. But they cannot be spared, because they could recolonize the reef at great speed, and this would compromise the results of the study. The divers have gone through the reef with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that not a single specimen has been missed. The protocol is strict and requires that all specimens, dead or alive, be removed. Not even a carcass can remain in the experimentation zone.
Pretty much it was a good dive, but a lot of lionfish considering we just removed fish from this reef 3 months ago.
Okay.
Okay, so the gape height and width.
Yep. Roger that. Gape height, we got 5 centimeters.
Okay.
Gape width is 4 centimeters.
The dissection will provide unique information on the physiology, biology, and ecology of the living organisms. The fish's weight, its length, the length and height of its mouth will all be entered into the species database. Nicola opens the stomach of the dissected fish. The stomach of a lionfish can dilate up to 30 times its empty volume. This is what provides the fish with such a voracious appetite.
This is a crab.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so we had a clinging crab,
Yep.
digestion level 3, and again that volume was
That volume is 2 milliliters.
2.
Studying the stomach contents makes it possible to follow the dietary evolutions of the lionfish in a given zone and to measure the impact of these changes on the environment.
Lionfish have colonized virtually every marine habitat in the Bahamas, from shallow water coral reefs to deep water coral reefs to mangroves to seagrass areas to marinas to sandy beaches around artificial structures. This makes local control efforts very difficult because we have to target not 1 or 2 habitat types, but multiple habitat types over an entire archipelago.
The scope of the task seems somewhat overwhelming, but the mission moves forward. At a depth of 100 feet, Skylar and the team have started to clean another reef. The movements of the injured fish have caught the attention of a grouper. The grouper is a common predator in the Atlantic. Like most predators, the grouper is always on the lookout for prey and is not scared off by the presence of divers. Skylar is often amazed at how daring the groupers are. To the grouper, the lionfish is a newcomer to Bahamian waters and isn't on his list of usual prey. Observation has shown that only on rare occasions will the grouper eat small or young prey. If the divers hadn't wounded this adult lionfish, the grouper probably wouldn't have shown an interest. has taken care to swallow its victim head first, probably because it instinctively mistrusts it. And he is right to be cautious. Underneath the lionfish's pretty bands lie its poisonous spines. Accidental contact with these spines would be painful and perhaps even dangerous. Skylar Miller tirelessly repeats these words of caution to Bahamian students who run the risk of facing these poisonous spines whenever they swim.
Near beaches? Warm areas. Everywhere. Yeah, we have them everywhere in all sorts of habitats. All on the dorsal side here. And how many dorsal spines do you think that lionfish has? Anybody know? So there are 13 spines on the dorsal fin of this species of lionfish, okay? Remember how Nicola said there are many different species of lionfish? But the one that we find here in the Bahamas has 13 dorsal spines, and these are each independent. They can move around. And as you can see, this skin, right, slides down very easily away from the spine. Okay, so this means that the tissue, the venomous tissue, is actually contained within this, all right? So if I touch it, it's okay. If I poke myself, envenomate myself, then that's where the problem is. So even though this fish has been dead for a few days, even though the spine is removed, it still possibly contains venom that can harm me.
So the venom glands, when they are disrupted, they release venom into the victim. And the venom is a neurological toxin that affects the nervous system. It can cause extreme pain in humans, allowing for things to occur like paralysis, temporary paralysis, blistering, extensive swelling, and very extreme pain for several hours. It may be similar to a wasp sting, an extreme wasp sting at first, that will gradually get worse. There have been some cases, some very rare cases, in which people have died from lionfish and scorpionfish stings. We're not aware of any in the US currently. This is the spine itself here. You can see the hard bony structure with the tip. This is the spine. These are the grooves of the spine here. And then this is the venom gland.
The lionfish doesn't have a venom gland, so to speak. The poison is enclosed in hundreds of little pouches along the length of the spine. When the spine enters the victim's flesh, the skin tears, the pouches burst, and the poison is absorbed by capillary action. The lionfish has 13 poisonous spines on its dorsal fin, 3 on the anal fin, and 1 on each of the 2 pelvic fins, a total of 18 spines, defending it from predators on all sides.
In the Red Sea, we see that the lionfish is in balance with the natural ecosystem. The lionfish is a native predator of the Red Sea, but it also has competitors. What we see in the Red Sea is we see lots of grouper species that are about the same size and are also very effective predators. So when we see lots of groupers, we see very few lionfishes, and vice versa.
Unfortunately, this competition between predators in the same category doesn't exist in the Atlantic. Groupers and lionfish quietly observe each other without demonstrating any hostile behavior.
In the ocean of the southeast and tropical Caribbean Sea, there are really no natural predators that have been documented to actually be preying upon lionfish at a rate that can control their local densities.
There is no doubt that wherever it settles, Pterois volitans becomes a super predator that dominates and doesn't share. But this doesn't explain how this rockfish, which is sedentary by nature, has managed to colonize such huge territorial expanses. Nature has made it easy for the lionfish to spread and disperse, thanks to its method of reproduction. The reproduction of the lionfish in its natural habitat has never been observed or filmed. It's only by observing the reproduction of neighboring species that we can attempt to reconstitute it. The male performs a mating parade to seduce the female. When the female accepts his attentions, she rises to the surface and releases a gelatinous mass filled with hundreds of thousands of eggs. The male then showers this mass with his sperm and fertilizes the eggs. The jelly-like mass is carried away by the currents. As it drifts, it dissolves and disintegrates, leaving the eggs to disperse over considerable distances. Most of the eggs in the young fish are eaten by all sorts of predators, but so many are fertilized at one time that there are enough survivors to allow Pterois volitans to expand its empire. In addition, the species is particularly fertile.
Lionfish have a very robust and vigorous reproductive biology. They are capable of reproducing every 3 to 4 days. The females can release over 2 million eggs per year. And they can become sexually mature within a year.
On the island of Eleuthera, the second phase of the protocol has ended. The lionfish have been eliminated and have now returned. For Nicholas Smith, the third and final phase can begin. It's time to analyze the results of the data that has been collected.
So the first 6 months of data looks really exciting. We found that if you remove lionfish once every 3 months or once every 6 months from coral reefs, we were able to reduce lionfish numbers by 50% or more than if we'd done absolutely nothing at all. What's even more exciting is the fact that removing lionfish only once every 6 months seems to have the same ecological impact as removing lionfish once every 3 months, in terms of we're having the same number of lionfish densities at 3 versus 6 month removals. This is exciting because this means that in terms of management, we can get the same ecological effect for half the amount of effort. So this looks really hopeful because it looks as if we will be able to control lionfish in small localized areas with not a lot of effort.
We now know that elimination in a limited zone has a significant impact on the lionfish population. But how can we treat vast regions with countless reefs? The Bahamian government is counting on the local fishers. An educational campaign has been launched in an effort to convince them to overcome their prejudice against the lionfish. They were hesitant at first, but they have begun to change their minds.
Bahamians, natives get into eating them. Some natives get into eating them. And before, when they came first, everybody thought that the meat was poison, because they understood that the lionfish had a poisonous venom. But people are now growing out of that fear and beginning to eat the meat.
Relying on the small-scale fishermen may seem pointless, but the local fishermen are highly active and many. They know all the reefs by heart. But their role can only be a limited one. Most of them can't dive deeper than 65 feet below the surface. That's not deep enough for this fish, for we still don't know at what depths it can live in its new home.
Wait till you start suiting up and...
Didier Noirot is a top-notch professional diver. Didier and Walt Stearns are prepping for a deep-water dive that will take them beyond the 230 feet mark. Will they find lionfish at such depths?
Okay, clear.
The divers must use a very complex system known as the recycler in order to descend to such depths. The recycler provides them with a special gas mix called the trimix. This mix is specifically adapted to high-pressure situations. After a long descent, Didier Noirot and Walt Stearns reach a wreck. The area seems at first to be free of lionfish. Is Pterois volitans not able to withstand such depths? Or did this 400-pound grouper take care of him? The suspense doesn't last for long. Lionfish are indeed here. Once again, the usual pattern is confirmed. The lionfish have taken over the wreck, and with the exception of the massive grouper, all the other species have virtually disappeared.
Louis, you right here?
On a fait une plongée à peu près
We
à
went down to
80,
265 feet, and there were still
on voit toujours des
lionfish.
poissons léons. Apparemment, rien
Nothing
ne les arrête.
seems to stop them.
Continue
We
à
continued
descendre, à
further
descendre.
down, even further,
On en
and
a
we
vu
saw
autant
as
comme
many as we
autant dans
had
l'espace des
further
20-30
up, in the
mètres sur les
65 to
récifs.
100 feet
On arrive
range near
ici
the
dans
reefs.
une épave
Here we are
profonde.
at a very
Il y
deep
a
wreck,
toujours du
and there's
poisson
still
léon.
lionfish.
Still lionfish down there.
Oh, they're not going to go away.
The Bahamian government is desperate in its fight and has no choice but to resort to enlisting the help of industrial fishers.
All right, how's it been? All right, it went well.
Frederick
You guys caught a lot of
Arnett
fish?
from the Ministry of Agriculture
All right, you
and
did not
Fishing
see any
is
lionfish?
going from boat to boat to encourage the
On this
fishing
trip?
bosses to capture
A lot of them.
lionfish.
All right.
Yeah, we saw plenty of them.
All right, because you know there's a big problem since there's invasive species.
Yeah, that's what they're doing now. They're killing out all the fish.
Yeah, man. In 2009, we decided to do something about it. We developed the National Lionfish Response Plan. The plan serves to maintain marine ecosystems, as well as to control lionfish populations and amend fisheries regulations. The lionfish problem is such a huge problem that one study actually shows that it has reduced prey species down to about 65%. So what are we going to do about it? We're going to eat them to beat them.
In order to set an example, Estefan Shaker, the chef at one of Nassau's finest restaurants, has put lionfish on the menu. Pterois volitans is a red fish, similar to other scorpion fish that are a delicacy in gastronomic cuisine. Once its venomous spikes are removed, the lionfish can be prepared just like any other fish. The fillets are easy to carve and have very few bones. The meat is tender yet firm and very tasty. When lionfish is well prepared, it's one of the finest exotic fishes.
But when you do have it on your menu, a lot of people are so excited to have it because they can't really have it any other place. So, all in all, it's a win-win situation. You save the environment, and you have a good tasting product on your menu.
Turning the lionfish into an edible fish won't suffice to slow down its proliferation. Only specimens of a certain size are worth fishing. This gives lionfish plenty of time to reproduce and to continue destroying the marine ecosystem. Has the lionfish won the battle? In 2009, lionfish reached the coast of Honduras in the Gulf of Mexico. In 3 years, they colonized the seabed, and more specifically, the marine park on the island of Roatan. The Honduran authorities, aware of the drastic state of affairs in the Bahamas, reacted immediately.
That's what I'm talking about.
The government has launched a campaign to fight the invader. Harpoons have been distributed to local populations, and underwater hunting competitions are organized all year long. Thousands of lionfish are regularly eliminated thanks to this initiative. But Nick Bach, the park's biologist, isn't satisfied with these results. Some other additional method needs to be found. Hoping to help Nick Bach in his research, Carl Stanley invites him to take a submarine dive. The best way to fight the enemy is to observe it tirelessly. and learn more about it every day. This military-style motto is perfectly suited to the war against Pterois volitans waged by these biologists. In this strange machine that he has built himself, Carl takes Nick further into the depths. They want to determine at what depth lionfish is surrounding the island of Roatan. As they descend, the daylight is slowly absorbed by the darkness of the water. At 250 feet, everything is turned gray. At 500, they're in pitch darkness. They continue their descent down to 600 feet, which is their goal depth. Nick is very focused. He has never been down this far before.
You should try to get this. I think he might get a fish here. He might get a fish here.
He's pinned them all up against the side.
Yeah. Oh, there's a big one by that coral.
Oh yeah, there it is. Look like it's hunting. There's all the little juvenile fish there, huh?
Yeah.
Gonna get one.
That's a big one.
It sees the one it wants. Look at it.
That's a good sized fish.
Oh.
This one seems more to be just hunting, not even minding us being here.
Yeah.
The many hours of observation have convinced Nick that in order to fight Pterois volitans, they must join forces with a natural predator.
Here's a big specimen. A nice lionfish here. It's all on its own. You might notice there's not really any fish around it. It looks pretty swollen stomach, so pretty much eats everything around it and then moves to another spot. So Carl.
Yes.
On a normal subdive,
yeah,
when you're kind of going down to 1,000 feet, how many lionfish do you think you see?
On a 1,000-foot dive, maybe 10. But you see them. I've seen them as deep as 800 feet, but mostly you see them. You see the most between 200 and 400 feet.
Okay, so they even go down to 800 feet, but most of them are around 200-300 feet.
200 to 400.
So finding one here at 500 feet isn't abnormal, but they're mostly abundant higher up.
Yeah, if we drive along at 300 feet, we'll see just constantly.
Are we heading up or what?
I'm gonna get a look at it.
If this natural predator is to be effective, it must be capable of eating adult lionfish that swim at various depths. Here in the Atlantic, there's only one marine animal that fits the bill: the shark. Giacomo Pallavicini, a researcher and the founder of Roatan's Shark Legacy Project, has convinced Nick Buck that the shark could be the ally everyone is hoping for. The two researchers are going to attempt an experiment in an area filled with sharks. The area is still infested with lionfish, despite last week's hunting competition. The Caribbean shark can measure up to 10 feet and is the largest predator in the Roatan Reef. But like the grouper and other predators in this part of the world, the shark is indifferent to the lionfish. It doesn't know that this newcomer's good to eat. The fact that sharks are not naturally attracted to lionfish is not a problem for Giacomo. Thanks to Samuel Gruber's work in Florida in the 70s, we know that sharks can be taught. Giacomo has decided to train the sharks in the area to view the lionfish as a potential prey. The shark doesn't appear to be intimidated by the lionfish's spines. The experiment seems conclusive, but many scientists are opposed to this approach.
Shark feeding has been controversial for a long time, and also obviously shark feeding with lionfish, because it can change the behavior of the sharks in their natural environment. Now, yes, it is true that it does everything that we do on the water, it will affect their behavior. Introducing the lionfish to the sharks, which is a new organism that they never seen before, especially in the Caribbean, has helped, because we only did a couple of times, probably 2 or 3 months of it, and then after that we haven't even fed the sharks with them. And it seems that they have recognized the lionfish as a food source without us feeding them to them. So yes, it does has an effect with sharks, but I think in a bigger picture, we have helped the reef, and we hope we help it for a future and permanent future.
Even if Giacomo Palavancini is right, which remains to be seen, sharks will only be able to act at best as regulators. Will we ever be able to stop the spread of the lionfish?
I would say that I am not optimistic about the future of lionfish. I see the lionfish invasion progressing, continuing to expand in both its distribution. We now have lionfish in the southeastern Caribbean. We will likely see them continue to invade along the coast of South America, perhaps as far south as the northern coast of Argentina.
How far will the lionfish extend its empire? It seems insatiable.
Lionfish do not survive when the mean winter bottom water temperatures go below 15 degrees Celsius. So this 15-degree mark appears to be a threshold where above that lionfish survive and thrive, but below that, you just don't even really find them at all. But their likely distribution is probably going to extend all the way from Cape Hatteras, North Carolina in the north, all the way south to the northern coast of Argentina. Or we're not thinking that it's likely that lionfish will disperse through the Panama Canal, probably for a couple of reasons. The water's kind of cold in the Pacific, so there's a big temperature difference between the Pacific and the Atlantic, as well as there being freshwater lakes that could also be a barrier to dispersal. However, we really don't know for sure whether they can disperse through the Panama Canal.
No one knows if the lionfish will be able to cross the barrier of the Panama Canal. But if it does, this merciless predator, moving unhindered at the speed of the underwater currents, will pursue its conquest of the West. King crabs were not originally found on the European coast. They were introduced here. They appeared in the north of Norway towards the end of the 70s. In just a few decades, they have conquered the northern European Arctic coast. How far will the giant crabs expand their territory? Should we be worried? Scientists are continuing to discover the resources and adaptability of this crustacean invader.
They are evolutionarily very successful.
Their leg span can reach up to 180 centimeters. and they can weigh up to 10 kilograms. The king crab is one of the largest shellfish in the underwater world. They are also called red king crabs. Their scientific name is Paralithodes kamchatkas. This is Latin for stone crab that comes from Kamchatka, the peninsula in the Russian Far East. Marine biologists started to worry when the crabs were found in Norwegian waters at the end of the 70s.
I remember one time I was diving and I saw a king crab that was eating bivalve, and I got closer to the crab, and suddenly it just raises up on the back legs and having the claws right in the up in the water, and I was so scared. So I went back and started to get another way away from the crab. So it's really frightening.
The water is very cold and highly oxygenated. The Arctic seas have a rich biodiversity. Over 4,000 species have been discovered in the Barents Sea, more than in any other of the Arctic seas. This inventory is far from complete. Like all polar systems, the Barents Sea Arctic ecosystem is characterized by high biological productivity and home to many rare species. The ecosystem is very rich, but also very fragile, and not strong enough to withstand a predator as powerful as the giant crab. And is depopulating the seabed. This is resulting in a change in the balance of the species. Has an insatiable appetite. It's an omnivore, and it devours all prey that comes within its reach. Bugnes Port has 200 inhabitants. It is 500 kilometers north of the Arctic Circle and is dependent on its cod and salmon trade. It's one of the first villages in Norway where the king crabs appeared. The first catch in 1977 caused a commotion. The public was curious as well as scared. The fishermen who caught the first king crabs were proud of their catch, but they didn't know what to think of these unusual crabs. How did the crabs come to Norway? At the beginning of the last century, they were only found in the North Pacific. Americans, Japanese, and Russians fished and sold king crabs. King crab sells for a good price, and the export trade is successful. Stalin and then Khrushchev was convinced that this miraculous crab would help to feed people on the shores of European Russia. Yuri Orlov, a Soviet scientist, embarked on a project in 1961. Orlov captured crabs that lived on the Kamchatka coast. His aim was to move them to the other side of the continent. Orlov tried out different types of transport: helicopters, planes, trains. He took thousands of crabs through Siberia. They traveled from Vladivostok to Murmansk, a journey of more than 10,000 kilometers. Many crabs perished during the journey. Orlov didn't give up until he had achieved what he had set out to do. In the late 60s, a selection of fertilized females arrived safely at their destination. They were placed in the water 6 miles from Murmansk in the Kola Gulf, where it opens up into the Barents Sea. The king crabs multiplied quickly. By the end of the 70s, they had colonized the Russian waters and moved into Norway. They followed the northern coast of Scandinavia and descended towards the south. In 2009, a king crab was caught in Bergen. The king crabs should have been deterred by the warmer waters as they headed southwards. However, they moved on to colonize the northern fjords. The maze of steep and plunging cliffs does not discourage the king crab. This concerns Liz Lindahl, the senior marine biologist at the Institute of Marine Research in Norway.
So I was here also for several years ago, before the king crab came into the inner parts of the fjord. So this is the reference point. And as you have told me, now the king crab has come. And we need to look how it looked like now. And we compare it to what it was before.
Yes. Step in here. So, now we are approximately here.
So this is the places where we are a bit afraid that there might be too much king crab, and that had maybe a very big impact on the Arctic fauna.
Yeah, because this is fauna here is the same as you find in the Spitsbergen area.
Yeah, and all the way up in the Barents
And
Sea.
if it's removed from here, we don't know where it can be replaced from.
It is still unknown whether the king crab has fully colonized the Porsanger fjord, or if some areas remain unaffected. Crabs move quickly and are difficult to locate.
So how deep is it here?
We are approaching now this location where we expect to find some crabs, and here's probably some small fishes.
You can't detect them using a sonar device. The only way to know where they are is to dive in and look for indications.
I would like to see on the bottom animals if we find any fingerprints from the king crab.
Yes.
So if there are any bivalves that is crushed,
Yes.
or any sea stars that are missing arms,
Yes.
that's what I want to look for.
Okay.
You can't always see the king crabs under the marine vegetation. There are definitely king crabs in the Porsanger fjord, but it's difficult to say how many exactly. So the divers collect traces of their eating to establish the density of their colony. Biologists examine discarded shells in order to determine whether the predator was a crab rather than a seal or a seabird. certain places, the seabed is covered with shell remains. The wildlife that is usually present here has disappeared. The crabs roam the almost deserted seabed in search of any remaining prey. It's more than likely that they are responsible for this carnage. This is a standard-size male king crab. The biologists are taking it to a laboratory to study its predatory habits. Lise's fears have been realized. During the last 10 years, the crabs have come to Porsanger, a fjord that travels more than 60 miles inland, and have settled almost everywhere. The next step is to evaluate the impact of the king crab on marine life. Their claws are long and agile. Their function is not just mechanical. They're extremely sophisticated, and they enable the crabs to locate their prey. Underneath its prickly shell, the king crab hides a network of highly sensitive sensors along its legs. They send a stream of information to the brain. Touch-sensitive hair is located on the ends of its claws and can detect shells that are buried in the sand. It captures and manipulates its victims with menacing skill. Has small, agile fingers on the side of its mouths. It is covered with tactile hairs that determine the taste and suitability of its prey. If it's okay to eat, the crab moves the food towards its mouth. The crab uses its mandible to crack the shell into pieces and tear the flesh apart before swallowing it. The biologists look at the unedited images.
The king crab and the sea anemone is eating aggressively the medusa here.
Yeah, it's amazing. And it's not even affected at all by these sting cells.
No, it even takes it right into the mouth.
Yeah, and it looks actually, I find it tasty.
Yeah.
The young crab has caught a jellyfish and doesn't seem to be affected by its sting.
Are really fighting for them as something, as a treat.
That's
it seems
amazing.
like the king crab is winning. He can even taking out of the sea animals.
Dragging it out of the mouth, So it's a really aggressive predator.
It's really competitive in this new habitat.
Yes.
So they get easily through their defense mechanisms.
Through thousands of years, these species have adapted to their environment, but suddenly a new invasive is coming in, and they are harmless. They cannot protect themselves for this kind of predation.
Lise visits a study center near the city of Tromsø in order to learn more about the king crab's diet. She is attempting to measure the amount of food that each crab consumes on a daily basis in order to estimate the damage that a crab colony can cause in a fjord. Liz distributes prey to the captive crabs. The prey has been counted.
This investigation is very important because we need to know what it is eating, what size of prey it is eating, and also how fast it is eating. Because without this, we will not be able to make any calculation about how fast the nature and environment will change in future. So this is a very important experiment.
The experiment takes place at night. This is the period of maximum activity for the king crab. They are filmed for 12 hours. The crabs start by attacking the starfish. They have soft flesh and are easy to catch. They then start devouring the sea urchins. The crabs easily pierce their armor in spite of their spines.
Now I am curious what has happened during the night. So I see that it seems as everybody has been eating at least one sea urchin and one sea star. And extrapolating this to the nature, we will see that for each king crab per day they will remove prey or 2 prey. So that will make a difference if the population of king crab becomes big enough.
By eliminating certain prey, such as the starfish, and by sparing the larger prey, such as the bivalves, the king crabs have created an imbalance in the ecosystem and consequently have caused a loss of biodiversity. The king crab does not only use its claws to search for food. It also has remote sensors that allow it to locate prey that is out of sight. These antennas are the equivalent of the nose. They constantly sweep the area in search for prey. They have ultra-sensitive sensors that are able to detect more than 400 different molecular odors. The crab lurks on full alert in the hunting area. It has detected prey using its antennae. It comes across a sea urchin. It cracks the shell open in just a few seconds. The shell gives the crab the calcium it needs to strengthen its own shell. The sudden arrival of this insatiable predator in the hitherto untouched fjords has endangered the entire food chain. It is essential that the scientists discover more about the king crab and the way in which it is colonizing the coasts and the fjords. Jan Sundhed, a biologist at the Institute of Marine Research in Norway, is studying their movement.
We attach this to a single crab and release the crab in an area, and then we put some buoys to what we call receivers, acoustic receivers, that actually can detect these small tagging signals or tag signals from each individual crab. Put it here on the leg on the crab, so each of these 25 crabs were actually carrying one of these. And the frequency of these tags were so particular that we can identify each crab. So we can say crab number 14 went from there to there, and so on. What the experiment showed us was that the crab moves all the time. It doesn't sit still at any time. It's continuously moving.
The king crab is always on the move. It is continually exploring new areas. It surmounts obstacles with ease. The uneven depth of the fjords and the temperature of the water is perfect for the king crab. Some of them settle permanently in the fjords. Their sedentary presence leaves little chance for marine life to regenerate. Unlike most other crabs that move laterally, the king crab can walk forward at a rapid pace and can travel up to 6 miles per day. By tracking crabs that have been equipped with tags, scientists discovered that they could move into the deeper fjords, some more than 200 fathoms deep. This is surprising given that the seabed is empty at such depths, at least in appearance. There is an abundance of wildlife in the mud that is produced by the decomposition of surface organisms. The king crabs are aware of these hidden resources. They burrow their long fingers into the sludge and devour everything they find. Tiny organisms inhabit the sedimentary sludge. King crabs like to consume them. Since the creatures are small, the crabs need to excavate large areas to consume large amounts.
But in the deepest basin, we also have sediment or sand, and inside that we have a lot of worms, bivalves and tiny small crustaceans. So they also have a much higher regeneration time or productivity than if we compare this biomass with the sea stars and sea urchins and big prawns that we find in the Arctic basins.
The sludge is at the bottom of the food chain. Worms and other tiny organisms play an important role in the recycling of organic matter and oxygen. If they disappear, the seabed will become sterile and the entire food chain will be weakened. The biologists fear that crabs will reach particularly fragile areas that are home to rare marine organisms and relics of the last ice age. Jan Sundet and his colleagues from the University of Tromsø are on an observation ship. They are situated at the far end of the Porsanger Fjord. It's not yet known if the crabs have reached this area. A camera has been submerged underwater to film the seabed. The water is 4 degrees and it is 17 meters deep. Suddenly, the camera captures something remarkable. There are so many crabs that the seabed is barely visible. What has caused them to gather together? It looks like it's a group of young crabs. Scientists believe that the young crabs formed large and compact groups in order to deter predators. These group formations could also be a phase of socialization. Jan takes a closer look and discovers something else. The group leaves behind countless empty shells. They have shed their external skeletons that have become too small for them during a period of growth. A steroid hormone secretion causes the obsolete shell to crack open. The new shell is still soft. This means that the crabs are extremely vulnerable, and this is perhaps the reason that they shed their shells in groups and form a colony. Fully grown king crabs molt less frequently. This rebirth cycle allows them to regenerate and strengthen their shells. The number of predators of the king crabs decreases once they are fully grown, because their shells have become strong enough to protect against attacks. The wolffish has spectacular canine-like teeth and is called the boot eater by fishermen, but it's not big enough to take on a king crab. The snake-headed fish can measure 5 feet and weigh 30 pounds. It shares more or less the same prey as the king crab and does not appreciate the new competition on its territory. This king crab has seen its rival and shows its white undershell in an attempt to intimidate it. If the wolffish attacks the crab, it can rely on its natural armor. The crab's shell withstands its opponent's teeth, even if it loses a leg or two. The wound is immediately covered with a protective membrane that prevents it from bleeding. A stub quickly forms. It will then develop into a new leg. The leg will eventually grow back completely. However, regrowth takes time because the leg develops when the crab sheds its shell. Many of the king crabs are lame, but they still survive. They show extraordinary resilience. This remarkable resistance is also combined with a tremendous capacity for reproduction. Scientists have studied their reproduction habits in depth. They have found that females prefer to mate with large males. The life expectancy of the king crab is 20 to 30 years. They become adults when they are between 4 and 7 years old. Biologists examine the proportion of large males and females of reproductive age in order to predict the growth of a colony. The breeding season begins in spring. It is an essential stage in the life cycle of a king crab. Females emit pheromones that attract males, who in turn respond to this mating call. The male takes hold of the female and carries her. female remain closely entwined for 2 weeks. Neither of them feed until the female is ready to be fertilized. As with other crab species, they store their eggs inside their shells. However, the female king crabs keep their eggs for a long period, approximately a year, to ensure good maturation. Immediately after hatching, up to 400,000 larvae disperse throughout the water. Currents carry them for miles on end, and they survive despite the large temperature differences. It is springtime. The larvae take advantage of plankton bloom to feed and start their growth. They move slowly and have to hide from the countless predators that are ready to pounce on them. The surviving larvae begin a series of transformations before they reach their final form. The larvae become small crabs. The king crab appears to be an invincible conqueror. Only one species seems able to overcome this creature that is taking over the Norwegian waters: humans. In many Finnmark villages like Bugnes, the fishermen have quickly realized that the invasion of king crabs represents an opportunity.
Begin like a problem, because the king crab first species, when they came, they went into the cod nets and disturbed the fishing of cod. And me and another guy, we was running a fish factory, mostly for salmon and cod. So we have to help the fishermen to finance the problem. But then when we saw the king crab, more and more came in the nets, we also saw, of course, that this is can be exclusive meat. Some years ago, I took the value of king crab, the landings from the fishermen. It was 100 million Norwegian kroner, and 60% of those was created in small villages like Bugnes, with 200 people or more or less. So king crab is a blessing to small places that have not so many options regarding creating working places and industry.
The Norwegian fishermen have started crab fishing, but unlike in Kamchatka and Alaska in the 20th century, they have not built factory ships. They have simply adapted their equipment for king crab fishing, and they work on small boats that are less than 15 meters long and enable them to fish at sea or in the fjords.
The first time we fishing was in 1993. Then we begin, and we was 4 boats in 1993, and now we are 500.
The Ministry of Fisheries has imposed fishing limits. They do not want to exhaust this new resource and have imposed quotas in order to preserve the stock. fishermen that become allies to the crab invaders.
As far as I know, no examples around the world that people are fishing on introduced species. Mainly, the management goals of introduced species is that to get rid of it as soon as possible. But in Norway, we have actually said that we want to keep it in a certain geographical area. Outside this area, we want to get rid of it. So it's actually two different management goals, which are actually contradictory.
Regulations require Norwegian fishermen to put females back in the water if they are carrying eggs. In the end, public opinion in Norway is divided. Biodiversity experts want to eliminate the crabs, whilst fishermen want to keep them in the area. The Norwegian fishermen are prolonging the idea the Russians had of using nature for their own economic gain. They're not the only ones. In the North Pacific, in the region where the king crab originates from, people are pursuing the same goals. The crab population here in Alaska has drastically declined since the 80s, when it became a victim of overfishing. Laboratories in the ARTE crab program are working to reconstitute settlements of several species of king crabs on the North American coast. Scientists hope that their studies will enable commercial fishing to resume.
These Glaucothoe are looking really healthy. I'm very proud of all the research that we've accomplished here at the hatchery. We feel like we've overcome the hurdle of culturing the larvae to the juvenile stage. And these Glaucothoe they're looking very healthy, and several months from now we'll hopefully be releasing them back into the wild at some point in the near future. The idea with this stock enhancement project is that we would be culturing the juvenile to increase natural survival of the larvae to overcome some of these population bottlenecks at the early life history stages. And so sort of man interfering and improving that population bottleneck is sort of a strategy to try to get some of these depressed populations to increase in numbers.
Before releasing the crabs bred in captivity, scientists ensure that they will not impoverish the genetic stock of wild crabs or transmit any diseases to them. Is this the miracle solution that the Alaskan fishermen are hoping for? Ultimately, nature will decide.
Yeah, I look out at the ocean and I think it might be nice to release crabs into Resurrection Bay someday. I can imagine them released into the ocean and spreading out and really thriving here.
The king crab is opportunistic and resourceful. Its reign is far from over, and its many skills are yet to be revealed. prefers cool waters. Scientists are hoping to anticipate its future distribution by studying its ability to withstand higher temperatures out of the Arctic seas or due to global warming.
The crabs, as all other kind of animals, they are optimizing their behavior dependent on the environmental conditions in this area. So maybe the future king crab in this area will actually be able to tolerate higher temperatures than we have seen in the Bering Sea. For instance, we have done some study on the larvae, and we have got some surprising results showing that the larvae are able to survive much higher temperature than we expected regarding the studies that has been carried out in the Bering Sea. Maybe temperature up to 18-20 degrees, and which is much, much higher than we expected.
Yuri Orlov, the man who brought the king crabs to the North Atlantic, was convinced that they would be transported either by fishermen or as larvae traveling in ship ballasts and would colonize the coast right up to Gibraltar. This would mean that they are able to travel through the warmest waters in Europe, like here in the English Channel. This might not be possible.
The temperatures here in early June do already exceed 13 degrees water temperature, which is the maximum king crab species, or at least some of them, can survive. We may find them up in Scotland, and they are obviously species along Norway, but in the light of global warming, it is even more unlikely that they spread further south. Oh, here we have a marvelous specimen.
The king crab, therefore, has a higher chance of survival and expansion in the polar regions. It's possible that they could cross the deep ocean waters that separate two continental fringes. What depths can a king crab survive in? This is what Sven wants to find out. The crab is placed in a pressurized chamber. A probe is used to measure its heartbeat. Its cardiac rhythm indicates its resistance. The increasing pressure simulates a descent into an abyss.
30. Still no change in heartbeat frequency. 35. 85. Yes, I think we are passing a threshold slowly. The heartbeat is starting to slow down again. So at 120. Which is equivalent of 1,200 meters water depth. It's pretty significant. Increasing to 125 bar. So that's 125 bar, 1,250 meters water depth. Do you think this crab can survive any more pressure? I really think we should stop now because the respiration rate is going down. Okay, we'll reduce pressure. It's very active, so it did really survive this pressure treatment well. No damages. This is a very shallow water king crab, and it would probably do well up to 1,000 meters water depth. So this would not enable it to cross the deep ocean abyss, but it could move along ocean ridges, which are often considered to be highways through the deep sea or the outer continental margins. They know how to survive. They have colonized the oceans globally where they're cold enough. So they are evolutionarily very successful.
With such extraordinary capacities, the future of the king crab is wide open. Its resistance to low temperatures and deep waters and its capacity for adaptation has enabled it to exist throughout millions of years of evolution, during which the climate changes have been severe and numerous. Whatever happens, it will always find an area in the sea where it can take refuge, and if conditions are favorable, it will proliferate. An area of the sea where ice is melting, where water is slightly above 0 degrees, is an ideal condition for this king of the sea. The future of the king crab continues to be determined by humans, but we by no means control its evolution. Now that the door to the icy Arctic seas has been opened, the king crab conqueror is free to determinedly continue its search for new territories, to reign supreme. For thousands of years, the pine processionary caterpillar, an indigenous European insect, has been marching slowly but surely towards the north. At the onset of spring, the insect colonies form a procession and leave their nests never to return. The pine is their natural habitat. They feed off its needles and are a threat to the entire plot of land. The processionary caterpillar is the great destroyer of Europe's forests. In the Landes region of France, processionary damages are so spectacular that you can actually follow the animal's trace. These trees have not been burned. They have been entirely devoured by packs of starving caterpillars. In less than 100 years, the processionary has crossed the whole of France as far as Brittany and the Paris region. The authorities now understand the threat they are facing. Several research teams are studying the behavior of this disturbing insect in the hopes of curbing its expansion. In southern Spain, geneticist Carol Kerdelhue and ecologist José Hodard believe that the expansion of this destructive caterpillar began in the area.
We're trying to determine where the pine processionary was able to survive the various frosts that have taken place during the Quaternary. Most European species, in this case, survived in the zones that remain temperate. The problem is that there are no processionary fossils, unlike many other organisms that leave a trace, such as shellfish, trees, or vertebrae. So we have to use an indirect genetic approach to try to understand what happened.
Genetic analysis reveals that during the last ice age 20,000 years ago, the pine processionary caterpillar was able to survive in 4 refuge zones. It is from these zones spared by the ice that the processionary set out to conquer Europe. The temperate oceanic climate and the warm winters of these regions were propitious for the caterpillars. These ones have just hatched, but they already have one obsession: eating. The pine processionary can only live in colonies of 100 to 150 individuals. Instinctively, it forms a procession in order to feed. For many years, scientists have wondered how such a tiny insect was able to cross over the Sierra Nevada range at an altitude of over 6,500 feet.
It was initially believed that the main European mountain ranges would block the pine processionary's migration from the southern refuges to the colonized zones in the north.
We are now about 2,000 meters, and as you can see, you can appreciate the vegetation change.
And do you know until which elevation we will find processionary mountains?
Pines around 2,200 meters, but we have different species. Pine along the we have in the lower part, Pinus alepensis, the Aleppo pine. Then here we have Pinaster pine, and then the top of the mountain we have Pinus nigra and Pinus silvestris.
The fate of the processionary caterpillar is therefore closely linked to that of the pine tree. Its favorite variety is the black pine, but if none are to be found, the processionary is an opportunist and will make do with other pine varieties. Its impressive claws allow it to grab all kinds of needles, thick or thin, hard or soft, smooth or rough. Its ability to adapt its diet has been a decisive advantage. Switching from one pine to another has helped it to cross over the Sierra Nevada.
Mountains are the ideal environment for the pine processionary. When there are climatic changes, the processionary adapts its altitude in order to find its favorite ecosystem.
The mountains may be advantageous to this caterpillar, but higher altitudes equals lower temperatures. However, the processionary doesn't mind. This is one of the few insects that can easily survive the 3 months of winter. Its winter nest protects it from bad weather. This unique ball of silk has helped the processionary march upwards and along the mountain peaks, reaching altitudes that would seem unreachable.
This is one of the highest places at which we can find this animal in Sierra Nevada.
I think it's a recent.
Some years ago, it was not here. So it's a recent expansion.
The nest thickens and evolves as the individuals grow bigger. Each caterpillar unrolls a silk thread as it moves. The regular toing and froing during the 3 winter months produces a constantly growing nest. The nest is made up of 2 superimposed layers. The inner layer is thick and serves to isolate. The outer layer is more flexible and serves as the framework. There is no entry or exit opening. To re-enter their impenetrable fortress, the caterpillars must push their way through the weave. The colder the region, the more solid the framework. The thicker the inner layer, the more the caterpillars are protected from the cold of winter and from predators. The nest acts as a solar receptor, absorbing nearby infrared radiation. Jérôme Rousselet is a biologist at the National Institute of Agronomic Research in France. He studies the thermal characteristics of the nests in order to identify at what temperatures the caterpillars will die.
This nest is generally well exposed to the sun, so as to take maximum advantage of the sunlight. With this heat camera, you can see that the nest temperature is close to my body temperature. This is considerably higher than the outside temperature, which today happens to be in the vicinity of 54 degrees. The caterpillars can withstand the cold from the third larval stage onwards. But thanks to this nest, during the course of the winter, they'll be able to resist temperatures as low as 3 degrees. Below this limit, they die. They'll also die if a lasting cold spell stops them from leaving the nest at night to feed.
When they arrived in the northern Iberian Peninsula, the pine processionaries stumbled upon the Pyrenees Mountains, whose highest peaks rise to an altitude of 11,100 feet. This would seem to be an insurmountable obstacle, yet they crossed over. Thanks to the Atlantic coastline's warm winters, a trail of caterpillars bypassed the mountains by following the coast. On the other side of the range, they discovered a highway to the north. Man had inadvertently rolled out the red carpet, the greatest artificial pine forest in Europe, and it's a 3-star restaurant for the processionary caterpillar. They invaded this new territory, which became the base for their conquest of France. Hervé Jactel, a researcher at the INRA, studies the impact of processionary caterpillars on forests.
On these leaves you can see how the processionary pine eats away at the foliage. When the eggs hatch, the young in the larval stages prefer to eat old leaves, 2 or 3 year-old needles. The next larval stages are not as picky, or perhaps more voracious. They feed on the needles of the current year that contains more resin. When all the foliage is consumed in this fashion, the levels of defoliation can reach as high as 100%. This is what we can see in the trees in this colony, which is undoubtedly one of the most infested ones in all of the land and perhaps in all of France.
The caterpillars wait for nightfall to leave the nest. They are vulnerable during daylight, but at night they are protected from many predators. They're not affected by the darkness because they're practically blind anyway. Their eyes are in fact 4 microscopic ocelli, an atrophied arc-shaped organ. Their sense of smell, however, is highly developed. This is what guides them to the tastiest needles. Many animal species fast during the winter. Processionary caterpillars, on the other hand, gorge themselves with food every night. Four or 5 nests are all it takes to strip an adult pine tree from top to bottom in the space of 1 month.
They diminish
the tree's photosynthetic capacity so it can no longer allocate as much energy towards growth. A drop in tree growth usually goes along with the defoliation caused by the processionary. And in rare cases it can cause tree death. Defoliation may lead to death in 2 situations. The first is when the weakened tree is attacked by secondary insects, such as the bark beetle. The second is when the tree is defoliated over 2 or 3 consecutive years. The tree is so weak that it dies in the end.
The pine processionary has exerted ecological pressure on this forest for hundreds of years. You'd think that the species would be content to prosper in this huge Garden of Eden, But at the beginning of the 20th century, they suddenly began to march towards the north. Scientists would like to know where their forward march will end so that the contaminated zones may be marked out. Mathematician Christelle Robinet has put aside her algorithms and her computer data in order to lend a hand to Jérôme Rousselet and his team. They've been alerted to the presence of processionary nests just north of Orléans. This region until now showed no signs of infestation.
We just entered a zone that wasn't colonized last year, so we're definitely at the colonization front, meaning a zone where the population is small and a few pioneering individuals have settled, not without difficulty. Our goal will be to tag the exact location of this last nest. If we find it, we will explore another area a few miles from here, in the hope of finding a totally processionary-free zone. This is how we succeed in establishing the border between the colonized and the non-colonized zones. Then it'll be your turn to play around with some models.
The front line is a tricky area for the pine processionary. There are few nests now, but if the conditions turn out to be favorable, new colonies will propagate.
I think there's one here.
Yes, there's one.
Let's check it out.
A small one in the back, about mid-height.
Okay, I see it. Okay, we've got that one.
I'll beep it. Perfect. Now we need to see if there are any others nearby.
Back at the laboratory, Christelle is transferring the GPS data recorded in the field.
Here's the GPS location of the nest that we saw in the forest yesterday. Let's assume that the pine processionary has settled in this 5 by 5 mile square. Thanks to observations conducted all winter long, we'll be able to establish the limit of the northern colonization front. If we increase the scale, we see that the colonization front has been charted all the way from Brittany to Switzerland.
This recent expansion, which is progressing quickly and unexpectedly, intrigues scientists. They are studying the adult processionary caterpillar and the different stages of colonization in the hopes of understanding what is taking place. The caterpillars have sunk into the ground. They have spent several weeks in this position and have secretly turned into moths. This is the imago, or the adult form of the pine processionary caterpillar. This moth only lives for one day, so all its energy must be devoted to fulfilling its destiny to reproduce. The processionary colonizes new lands by air, so the scientists are focusing on evaluating the species' flight capacity. They hope to deduce the amplitude and the speed of the spread.
It's impossible to follow processionary moths in the wild and to get a feel for the way they spread out. We need to know more about the flight capacity of the males and, more importantly, the females. They decide where future populations will settle. We've constructed an experimental device that enables us to measure flight distances. This device is simply a rotating axis that we place an insect on. We can measure the amount of circles it makes, and then we convert that number into distance.
Most of the time, the female is the first to tire. Her egg-filled abdomen weighs her down and limits her flight capacity. The male is more streamlined. The strong muscles in his highly developed thorax make him a powerful long-distance flyer.
The gender ratio is relatively balanced. There are as many males as there are females. However, they don't roam at the same time. During the day, the males roam earlier. This means that when the males set out, there are few available females. Their flight capacity, an average of 6 to 9 miles, is great enough to allow them to search the entire zone for the rare female. Through this behavior, they disperse and ensure a genetic mix on a local scale.
The male takes off on his first and final night flight. 1 to 2 hours later, it's time for the females to roam. They deploy their reproductive organs and release a sexual pheromone. The male in flight detects this chemical molecule thanks to its ultra-sensitive antennas. Only the hardiest contender receives the female's favors. He throws his remaining energy into the sexual act, which lasts over an hour. Of exhaustion, after having left his precious genetic legacy to the next generation. The female now chooses a pine needle suitable for laying her eggs. She will lay over 200 eggs, and she will cover them with scales from her belly. A few hours later, the female dies too. She leaves behind a mound of eggs that look convincingly like a pine bud.
The female's flight capacity is much lower than the male's, but she can still fly an average of 1 mile. The female decides where she lays her eggs, and this determines the location of the next generation. So the female's lesser flight capacity limits the speed of expansion north, but the survival of the population she has produced will depend on the weather conditions.
Because the caterpillars develop primarily during the winter season, they're highly sensitive to even subtle temperature variations that represent one of the key factors in the progress of this destructive animal. Christelle Robinet is compiling temperature, flight speed, and pine density to establish a statistical model to predict the spread of the caterpillar.
Two factors influence the Processionnari's progress. The first is global warming, and since the early 90s we've observed a rise in the minimum winter temperatures in France. This has helped the Processionnary to survive the winter and to settle in areas that have become more welcoming in terms of climate. The second factor is the presence of pines. On this map, you can see all of the forest zones in France. In certain regions, like the Beauce, there aren't any forests. You would think that this would hinder the caterpillar's progress. If you look along the A10 highway, you'll see that there are plenty of pine trees placed at intervals of up to 1.5 miles. The processionary can move from pine to pine and advance even faster than if it were crossing a forest.
The processionary moth's exceptional flight capacity enabled it to travel beyond forest zones. But man paved the way. We've planted pine trees, providing the processionary with a supply base. We've also warmed its environment with our emissions of greenhouse gas that have made winter temperatures rise. The processionary now lives among us. Hiding in its nest, it is preparing for a one-way trip. On a sunny spring day, they set off on their ultimate procession. The silk thread woven by each caterpillar in its wake is what links them together. They move forward, head to tail. Each head touches the belly hairs of the animal in front of it. Once the colony is on its way, there's no stopping it. A female is always at the head of the procession. The colony can wander like this for several days. The processionary is at its most dangerous during this phase, when the forward march is in open terrain. If it senses a threat, it releases hairs that are coated in a highly irritating substance. These lightweight hairs float in the air and contaminate the zones around the nests. This venom can be harmful to both animals and men.
People are often surprised to see us show up so heavily protected. In fact, city dwellers are usually unaware of the risks associated with these big white balls that are found in trees or the trail of caterpillars moving in between their feet. We're this well protected because the hairs are highly allergenic and can provoke reactions that at best may resemble poison ivy and at worst could induce anaphylactic shock.
A serious allergic reaction triggered by the microscopic caterpillar hairs. When the caterpillar feels threatened, it rolls into a ball and opens little pouches located on its back containing the stinging hairs. As a defense mechanism, the caterpillar shoots off these tiny hairs that act like invisible harpoons. When they reach their target, the hairs break and release their venom. Their sharp, barbed points can only be seen through an electronic microscope because they measure no more than 200,000ths of a millimeter. These hairs, dispersed in the wild, will remain poisonous for over 50 years. Huge quantities of these hairs get caught in the silk threads of the nest, turning them into time bombs.
The nest will remain poisonous for several months after the caterpillars have left. Throughout their growth during the winter months, they shed their larval skin several times. Each discarded skin contains millions of these hairs, which accumulate in the nest.
The spread of the Processionnary caterpillar is creating a considerable sanitary and ecological impact. It was urgent for both government and the scientific community to declare war on this destructive insect. The pine processionary is a polymorphous insect. It goes from caterpillar to chrysalis to moth. There are 3 enemies, not just one. While the processionary is still a caterpillar, the solution is to destroy its nest. This is a massive field job. Small towns often feel powerless when faced with such a task. And it's not a foolproof strategy. The moment has to be well chosen. Caterpillars are unpredictable fighters. They are capable of abandoning their nests earlier than expected. Fighting such a clever adversary requires a certain amount of cunning. As soon as the enemy leaves its silk fortress, it marches in neat columns. Annie Yart is a biologist at the National Institute for Agronomic Research. She's developing a way of eliminating entire caterpillar colonies using the tracking pheromones the caterpillars release as they move.
For the caterpillar, these tracking pheromones are a matter of life or death. From the earliest stages of its development, it must scatter in order to feed itself. The tracking pheromones allow it to find its way back to the nest that protects it from the cold. I have spread tracking pheromones on these strips of paper. Now I'll put the caterpillars on these strips. You can see that they're following the scent. They move their heads around from time to time, searching for their trace.
The caterpillars follow a path of chemical traces left behind by fellow processionaries. According to the scientists, it should therefore be possible to influence the caterpillar's migration and lead them to a dead end.
Our study involving the tracking pheromones strives to define these substances. We're looking to find out what makes up the pheromones so that we can artificially produce a synthetic variety. If such a synthetic pheromone were applied to a tree, it might provoke a dispersal of the caterpillars. If dispersed on the wrong tracks, they wouldn't be able to find their way back to their nest. Because they need to live in groups, they couldn't survive the winter temperatures on their own.
For the time being, this artificial pheromone is proving very difficult to synthesize. It will most likely take several more years of research in order to move from experimentation to implementation. There is another possible strategy on the battlefield, using the enemy's own weapons against it. For example, the processionary caterpillar, who can only move forward in a straight line, is kept going around in circles thanks to a simple plastic tray. Instinctively, they need to sink into the ground. A bag of soil will fool them and trap the entire colony. There's nothing left to do but collect the bag. Unfortunately, it's hard to imagine equipping all the pine trees of a given community. Those who escape the trap continue their procession, guided by their innate desire to sink into the ground. When the column leader finds a suitable patch of land, a sunny one, all the caterpillars regroup. Working together, they push themselves into the ground to a depth of 1 to 8 inches below the surface. Each caterpillar wraps itself into a nymph cocoon. Once it's all wrapped up in silk, an astonishing transformation takes place. The caterpillar will become a chrysalis. Intermediary stage between a caterpillar and a butterfly or moth. Once the transformation is complete, depending on climatic conditions, the chrysalis may enter a state of diapause. It puts a complete stop to its development, inert and camouflaged to blend with the earth it's hiding in. It's practically invisible to the human eye. But it's still not safe. Sharp, skilled beaks are close by.
What's interesting here is that we have all the right ingredients for the ideal hoopoe territory. There's the pine forest, which will provide food because the processionaries spend all winter there. They will sink into the grassy zone at the end of the winter, and it will become a feeding ground for the hoopoe, raising its offspring.
The hoopoe is a protected migrating species that is relatively common in our woods. It spends its winters in Africa and returns to Europe for the nice weather, which is bad news for the processionary.
It's pulling a victim out of the ground there.
It's digging up a processionary chrysalis. You see, it's removing the cocoon. This is a key predator because it feeds its young on processionary pine chrysalises in the springtime.
I see.
This species specializes in buried prey. It unearths them with its beak. An Italian colleague, Andrea Battisti, discovered that up to 70% of chrysalises could be eaten in this manner.
After a few weeks underground, the chrysalids that have been lucky enough to escape the hoopoe resume their metabolic activity. The processionary reaches the final phase of its metamorphosis. It becomes a moth. After the mating session, the female begins her search for the ideal pine in which to lay her eggs. This ravager, after having spent so much time on the ground, is finally airbound. She is searching for a pine tree well exposed to sunlight. Choosing the right tree is critical to the survival of the next generation. The female moth has a preference for the forest's edge, the treetops, and the isolated pines that stand out on the landscape. The scale of the war against the processionary has changed. How do we defend an entire forest against an invasion of female moths? Quite simply, by making it invisible to the eye of the moth.
First of all, we discovered that installing a border of leafy trees in front of the pines seemed to limit the attacks. This is probably because to the processionary, the outline of pine trees is a signal to lay its eggs. We pushed this idea further and studied the smells produced by the deciduous trees. We found out that these smells are repulsive to the adult pine processionary, so this also limits attacks. Right now, in this experimental forest, we're comparing 31 different mixes that associate pines and deciduous trees, oaks and birches. We're working to optimize the mix and obtain maximum protection against the pine processionary while maintaining sufficient maritime pine production. We're also working on extracting the olfactory ingredient found in the essence of birch. We're trying to develop a diffuser so that we can protect the pine trees planted in parks and gardens.
Deciduous trees have another distinct advantage. They are home to many of the processionary's natural animals, such as the effipiger, a grasshopper that loves insect eggs. If this grasshopper is lucky enough to come across a stash of processionary eggs, it will eat every last one of them. The leafy trees also house another fearsome yet graceful predator, the great tit. In the winter, when food is rare, some birds are willing to take the risk and approach the caterpillars despite their venomous hairs. The tits have learned how to pierce the nests. They carefully catch the caterpillars by the head, avoiding any contact with the poisonous hairs. But will these predators be found in all the lands conquered by the processionary? Will the weapons conceived by man succeed in curbing this progression towards the north? The only trend suggested by the different models is that the processionary will continue to spread. And that's not all. An unusual phenomenon involving the processionary has caught the attention of Portuguese scientists, particularly in tracts of forests located to the north of Lisbon. In 1997, an unusual proliferation of processionaries took place in the middle of summer. Entomologist Rosa Maria Paiva was the first person on the scene. 15 years later, she's returning with Manuela Branco, a biologist at Lisbon's Superior Institute of Agronomics. Manuela wonders if the disturbing propagation in the summer of '97 may have been the doing of a mutant processionary caterpillar evolving into a new species.
So this is here the place that you saw this huge infestation of the pine processionary moth in 1997.
Yes, in fact, we are very near the place where it started. In Lisbon, I read in a local newspaper from this area that something odd was happening here. That high infestation of processionary moths was ongoing. As you know, the larvae of processionary moths develop through the winter and not in the summer. I came here immediately on the 2nd of September, and what I've seen, it was something unique. The larvae had covered the trunks of all the pine trees. It was the most extraordinary sight that I've ever had in my long life of entomologists.
The mutant caterpillars have shifted their life cycle. Instead of developing during the cold months, like the processionaries that build winter nests, these caterpillars develop during the summer. This seasonal shift is no insignificant detail. It produces decisive behavioral changes. In particular, it affects their nest building. By developing during the course of the warmer season, this new version of the processionary doesn't need to fight the cold, so its nest is no more than a few silk threads.
Here we can see very well, very clear the differences between the larvae of the two populations on this time of year. So this larva is from the summer population, and she's very advanced. She's on the 15th stage, ready to pupate. And this one, the little one, she's just born. She's the normal winter population, and this is the normal phenology. The interesting thing is that you can find both on the same places, and even in some cases on the same trees. If so, since they live together, they are sympatric. They are isolated by time. Isolated. It's a kind of allochronic speciation. Very rare in nature and rarely observed.
Although the mutants appear identical to the processionaries living on a winter cycle, they have most definitely developed specific adaptations that enable them to live on a summer cycle.
And during summertime, particularly the temperatures can be very high. There are some days where the temperatures are above 40 degrees. So this was one of our questions. How can they survive? Very harsh summer. Because we know from previous research the limit of the survival will be about 30 degrees. So we thought, how can they survive if our temperatures are much higher than that?
To find out more about this disturbing question, Manuela and her team will compare the heat resistance thresholds of the standard and mutant caterpillars. Tens of specimens are being prepared for a stay in a closed chamber that simulates increasingly hot daily cycles.
In the lab, we compared both populations, winter and summer populations. And our main conclusion was that they really on these limits. I mean, the summer population can survive at higher temperatures than and the difference is 6 degrees Celsius. The summer population can have tolerance threshold 6 degrees Celsius above the winter population. So it's really a lot, and means that there is an adaptation to survive on these conditions during summertime. With time, in a very long time scale, it could give rise to a new species if there was time for that.
The presence of these two caterpillar populations able to attack the same pines one after the other in the same year is a considerable threat to Portuguese forests.
We could observe two defoliations of the pine trees, one during summer and winter, and this can be very stressful for the trees. Also, the summer defoliation is worse because the trees cannot recover. After the winter defoliation, spring, and during spring, trees reproduce new needles. So it's more easy for the trees to recover from the pine processionnary moss.
For the moment, the mutant caterpillar population remains confined to a zone of about 50 square miles. But for how long?
And also, what will be the future of this population? Where it is going to expand? What were the genes that mutated, for instance? Can it happen in other populations? There is still many scientific questions we have.
Scientists continue to worry about the spread of this mutant population. But an additional, more direct threat worries them just as much.
The pine processionary is spreading in a natural manner, but it can also do long-distance hauls. We've discovered isolated settlements around Paris, in Picardy, and in Strasbourg, all far from its original zone.
The processionary has a secret weapon that helps it to conquer new territories. Extended diapause. Under certain conditions, chrysalides can prolong their dormancy for several years. This extraordinary adaptation mechanism explains the reappearance of the caterpillar in regions where it was considered to be eradicated. So, we're never really sure we've got rid of it. And finally, an accidental transfer is always a possibility. Chrysalides sleeping in lumps of soil have inevitably been transported through Europe. Greater travel is not out of the question.
In Europe, the pine processionary is a native species, spreading as a result of climatic change. But in other parts of the world, there are several highly suited regions for it to settle. If it were accidentally transported to these places, the processionary will be declared an invasive species.
The processionary caterpillar's exceptional fertility rate and its remarkable ability to adapt, combined with global warming and globalization, place the planet within the grasp of a conqueror that, to this day, remains undefeated. The relatively unknown fire ant is the object of several studies, like this one in Texas. When it takes over a new territory, the fire ant begins by multiplying. A colony could contain up to 40 million individuals. It exerts total domination over the territory it conquers. It exterminates all other species, confiscates food for its own use, and ferociously defends its territory. Its formidable efficacy places the fire ant among the most devastating invasive species of the planet. It is commonly called the fire ant because of the burning venom that it injects with its stinger, located at the extremity of its abdomen. 100 million years ago, Solenopsis invicta wasn't an ant, but a wasp. The fire ant inflicts considerable ecological and economic damage. Agriculture pays a heavy price. Plants providing shelter in their roots or leaves must be examined and treated before being commercialized. Young livestock and poultry who are stung by fire ants are major losses. Costs the American economy several $billion each year. In order to understand the devastating success of this seemingly insignificant insect, scientists study the fire ant's strategies to conquer new territory and test methods to control its expansion. Will they be able to parry the attacks of these troops whose thirst for new territory appears unquenchable? The fire ant's odyssey began in Brazil. Solenopsis invicta originated in Mato Grosso in the southern Amazon forest. There, the fire ants were in competition with other ant species who were just as numerous, aggressive, and protective of their territory. Forced to share the resources, the fire ants were not the unleashed conquerors they would later become elsewhere. Rather, they blended into the ecosystem and were not considered hazardous. It was man who unwittingly gave them passage aboard ships, thereby opening new territories where competition was not so fierce for the ants. In less than a century, the fire ant has taken over the southern United States, attacked the Philippines, overrun China and Thailand, and entered Australia.
The red-imported fire ants were originally introduced through the port of Mobile, Alabama, and the soil that was in ships, and then they would dump it was used as ballast to weigh the ship down. Then they would dump the soil out in the harbor to then take on the weight of cargo. And so the ants were in the soil and they slowly spread, and it took them many decades. This was in the early 1900s, and they didn't reach Texas until maybe the late 60s, early 1970s.
The change in biotope could have been fatal to the fire ant, but the opposite occurred. When the fire ant left its native region, its hitherto unsolicited but innate features were put to use. professor in the entomology department at A&M University in Texas, Mickey Eubanks is a fire ant specialist. He has studied them for over 30 years.
Red imported fire ants are incredibly successful invaders for a number of reasons. And one of the reasons that they're so successful invading new territories is that they're very adapted to disturbance. For example, they can really handle flooding really well. So in their native habitats, they live in these floodplains that are prone to very severe flooding. And we see that here in the United States, where they can withstand flooding by forming these living rafts that allow a large percentage of the colony to survive in the water for a long time.
You can see the workers are amazingly strong. When I lift up with my forceps, you know, they'll produce these strings of workers that are just connected to each other. So they have very powerful mandibles and legs to make this happen.
Fire ants use their mandibles to cling to each other. This multifunctional tool is as powerful as a hydraulic jack. Workers hang on to one another, locking their mandibles and constructing a safety raft whose links are so tight the raft is water resistant.
Now, some of the workers that are forming this living raft, they're not going to be alive the whole time. They're going to sacrifice themselves. And they're willing to sacrifice for their sisters. And they're really willing to do this because of this unique genetic system that they have called haplodiploidy.
In a haplodiploid system, unfertilized eggs hatch to reveal males who are the worker ants. Fertilized eggs release females, the queen ants. As a result, a male carries only half as many genes as a female. Since evolution is based on the transmission of any given species' genes to the next generation, for the fire ants, it's preferable that the males, the workers, sacrifice themselves.
And that's what's happening here. They're actually, give their lives to prevent the rest of the colony from drowning.
Mickey Eubanks travels the world over to study fire ants. But it is on this lake that he leads his daily research on the surprising capacity of adaptation of this uncommon insect.
Oh, I see fire ants climbing up this dead tree. That might mean there's a raft that has touched the tree, and now they're coming off the water.
The raft is constructed in a few minutes. It floats because fire ants are hydrophobic. The chitin, which envelops the ant's body and protects it, is waterproof. The water ripples against the surface without entering the body.
It's made up of thousands of fire ant workers. Thousands of them are forming the basal layer that's on top of the water. And then on top of that layer will be hundreds or thousands of additional fire ants. Many of them will be carrying the larvae or the babies of the colony. They use those strong mandibles, their strong legs, to really hold on to each other.
When Mickey lightly pushes down on the raft, it doesn't sink. The very high density of the ants linked together ensures its cohesion. As such, a colony can float hundreds of kilometers on any type of water.
No matter how long you study these fire ants, they never cease to amaze you, and they're just so impressive. And then you can see some of the larvae, though, unfortunately for them, get used as sort of like life rafts. So this raft will stay together until it touches some emergent aquatic vegetation or something like this dead tree that we see here. And as soon as the raft comes in contact with the dead wood or the vegetation, the workers are just going to start scrambling up out of the water. And many of them, again, will be taking these larvae or the babies of the colony up the vegetation or up this dead tree to escape from drowning. That's their priority at this point, is to save the babies from drowning. Very efficient, very effective. Whoop, whoop. We don't want to get too close to the tree or they'll start coming in the kayak.
If the raft drifts for too long, the workers are forced to eat some of the larvae and eggs to avoid starvation. When the raft lands, the ants get off and find their way to dry land. The colony is safe. The fire ants, who have avoided drowning and survived famine, now look for new territory. Well adapted to the hazards of the humid tropical forest, fire ants are intrepid voyagers. They can climb mountains, cross rivers, and bypass deserts. Urban zones don't faze them either. On the contrary, if the fire ants discover a sizable piece of land, they won't hesitate to call downtown home. Walter Schinkel is the world expert on fire ants. His book, The Fire Ants, published in 2006, is the Bible for all those who work in the field.
I don't like the word invasive because it's a metaphor of war. My interest is not in fire ant eradication or control or anything like that. It's basic biology of ants. The main thing that is specialized about fire ants is its large colony size. We live in a hot climate, and the ants cannot travel those distances above ground. So they have evolved an underground foraging tunnel system. It's just a series of tunnels like rivers coming out from the mound that give them access to all parts of the territory.
Digging a tunnel in clay, sand, or pebbles requires adapted tools and technologies. What Walter Schinkel studies, life-sized, is the fire ant's behavior in man-modified terrain.
We have plots here, they're all 10 square meters. We've either tilled the soil, which is a disturbance, obviously. We've shaded them. Fire ants are reputed not to like shade, right? We get decent survival of newly-mated queens in plots that have been tilled. Then we know that tilling favors their survival. If we get poor survival in untreated plots, then we know there's something there that doesn't favor their survival.
The looser the earth, the easier it is to dig. The workers spin a network of galleries, some of which dip all the way down to the water table, the layer of soil that is saturated with water. The workers never stop digging. They're constantly opening new tunnels, connecting them, and adapting them to climatic conditions. In warm seasons, the galleries provide protection from drought. In the winter, they provide warmth. Fire ants do not hibernate. They can withstand cold temperatures down to 10 degrees below 0 degrees Celsius. The nest is a veritable underground empire, home to up to 250,000 individuals.
The fire ant is an ecological specialist that exploits disturbed habitat. Now, in its home in South America, that disturbance was largely natural. But with the advent of humans and with the transport to North America, then of course, most of the disturbed habitat is human-caused. So we clear land, we clear the natural forest that would cover the southeastern U.S. For agriculture, for building houses, for businesses, roadsides, parks. So once the ant arrived in the United States, it found itself fundamentally in paradise, because here was this vast amount of disturbed habitat. We call synanthropous species, that is, species that are associated with humans. It's been an extremely successful immigrant, at least as successful as humans, right? They are simply opportunists, that's all they are.
Some scientists have to travel the world over to do research, but Walter Schenkel has the privilege of conducting his research on the Florida State University campus in Tallahassee, where he teaches. With the help of his students, Walter has already exposed 15 meters of tunnels, which gives an idea of the digging capacity of the fire ant, barely 6 millimeters long, and of the extent of its underground network. Walter highlights the galleries with orange tooth powder. Non-toxic, the tooth powder dissolves in water. It allows the ants to be counted without disrupting them.
4 underground foraging tunnels that radiate out from the central mound give them access to every part of their territory. The system protects them from heat and predation, so they can travel long distances to cover their entire foraging territory.
Walter has also discovered that all the fire ants' nests are interconnected, a phenomenon called unicoloniality. Thousands of soldiers, for conquering or for defending, can be mobilized in the wink of an eye.
Here in the Tallahassee area, the mature size is probably 250,000 workers. In order to defend the territory, they have to blanket an area of, on average, 100 square meters with workers, foragers that go out, and that's how the boundaries are established when they meet workers from neighboring colonies. The average lifespan of a colony like that is about 7 to 8 years, and it's a single queen, so it's one giant family of sisters, and they're all complete sisters. There's one father and one mother. Territorial behavior is the core of fire ant biology. It's a species that defends an absolute territory against its neighbors, that is, other. And it does so by sending out foragers from the central nest. They move through underground foraging tunnels and come up in various parts throughout the territory, until they eventually run into foragers from the neighboring colony. And when they do, they are aggressive to one another, and they either fight and then run away, or they just turn back and run back into their own territory where they came from.
The local ant species called the harvester ant is much bigger than the fire ant, and yet it cannot measure up to the latter. In combat, Invicta displays an exacerbated aggressiveness that most often leads to the defeat or even the death of the adversary. Fire ants don't bite. They use their mandibles to cling to the enemy. Once they're solidly latched on, they inject their venom from the stinger at the end of their abdomen. Sting 7 or 8 times in a row, because unlike bees or wasps, their stinger does not detach once stuck into the enemy's body. When the fire ant engages in combat, it immediately emits a chemical signal, an odor. When a fellow fire ant receives the signal, it arrives immediately as backup. Very quickly, a fire ant cohort takes down the enemy, which finally succumbs after the violent assault. Ants are beaten. The fire ant's stinger is a mighty blade, spiked with harpoon-like points. The venom, colored here in red, is highly concentrated formic acid, like bee and wasp poison, and just as painful. The fire ant attacks all living things, humans, animals, and insects alike. Each year, millions of people are stung. More often, the stings leave no more than a bad memory, but the pustules may be infected and leave scars lasting for several weeks. Some fire ant victims die from anaphylaxis, or an allergic reaction to the venom, or because they are weak or disabled and unable to flee. Fire ants can also cause major material damage. Attracted to heat, they climb into electric circuits and cause short circuits that destroy transformers, signal lights, airport runway lights, and even start house fires. Each year, the fire ant causes hundreds of millions of dollars of damage. Public opinion now considers the fire ant a plague that must be eliminated at all costs. The fire ant travels as a stowaway via lumps of earth, trees, and even animals that are transported from one place to another. Farmers dread the fire ant not only for its painful sting, which can handicap and slow production, but also for its impact on crops. Scientists have proven the ant's destructive effect on plants, and particularly on buds. Fire ants have struck a surprising alliance with aphids, microscopic pests that feed off plant sap.
It turns out that fire ants are incredibly attracted to honeydew. So honeydew is excess sugar water that is excreted by aphid scales and other insects. They consume the honeydew, and that gives them lots of sugar. But in turn, they protect these aphids and other honeydew-producing insects from ladybird beetles and other predators. And we hypothesize that it's because there are truly arboreal ants in South America, and we don't have any of these in the United States. And so all of a sudden, they had free access to this honeydew, and we think it's a really important that it plays a really important role in the invasion success of fire ants.
It's a win-win situation. Thanks to the fire ant's protection, the aphids can multiply over and over. The accumulation of honeydew on the leaves blocks photosynthesis and in certain circumstances facilitates the development of mold. The plants die. In the southern United States, crop quantity and quality have considerably diminished. Each year, the federal government spends more than $1 billion to compensate for the damage.
I always found it ironic, I guess, that in the United States, we are an immigrant nation, and we understand the importance of immigration to success in life. And yet, we have this immigrant ant, which has done pretty much the same thing that humans have as far as biological success in North America, and we hate it with a passion.
Today, fire ants have taken possession of the entire local ecosystem, gravely threatening its equilibrium. Dr. Sanford Porter is the director of the Agricultural Research Service in Gainesville, Florida. He's convinced that one of Invicta's parasites is the key to curbing the fire ant's expansion.
When we go to South America, the fire ants in South America are only about 1/5 to 1/10 of as abundant. So we have 5 to 10 times as many fire ants in the United States. If we can bring up the right kinds of natural enemies, then we'll be able to keep the populations of the fire ants low forever. We have about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7...
Pseudaction curvatus, also known as the zombie fly, is a solitary parasitoid present in tropical zones and in temperate regions such as the southern United States. This minuscule fly, hardly bigger than an Invicta ant head, is diabolically Machiavellian. It positions itself near a fire ant colony and chooses its target. Under an electronic microscope, it's possible to see the curved bump which gives this fly its Latin name. The curved hooks are stylets that pierce the ant's chitin. In a flash, the zombie fly injects its eggs into the thorax of its victim.
Over here, 6, 7, 8. We bring in a few grams of ants from the field, and then we let the flies emerge into the box. The lifter lids start raising up and down, and as they raise up and down, the ants run back and forth between each of the cups. As they're running back and forth trying to move the brood from one cup to the other to keep them in the dark, the flies attack them. Fire ants are alarmed or disturbed. They let off a chemical that alarms the rest of the nestmates. The problem is when they do that, the flies can smell it. Then they begin diving in and hovering about 2 or 3 millimeters above the fire ants. And in just a fraction of a second, they inject an egg into the thorax of the ant, into the body of the ant. Each of the flies has about 200 eggs in it. And so once the fly begins attacking, it'll attack ant after ant, several ants each minute, injecting eggs into the ants.
What follows is blood-curdling. The zombie fly's egg hatches and transforms into a maggot that feeds off its host's vital fluids. The maggot then migrates through the ant's thorax towards the head, its final destination. During the 2-week period of the maggot's slow migration, the ant continues to live as normal, or so it seems. Once the maggot arrives in its victim's head, the maggot devours the brain to form a cocoon. At this point, the ant has become useless to the maggot, who secretes an enzyme to decapitate its host.
One interesting thing about these flies is that when the maggots begin growing in the ant's head, it takes over control of the ant's behavior. It kind of turns the ant into little zombies. So each of the ants are behaving according to what the fly wants and not necessarily what the ants want. So the fly makes the ant go into some place of the colony where it's safer, and the ant wanders around looking for leaf litter or some place to die. What's happening in the lab is similar to what's happening in the field, but in the field what is happening is that the ant is looking for a place to die because the fly or the maggot would want the ant to do.
Once the fire ants have been infected by the zombie flies, Dr. Porter reintroduces them into their original nest. Each contaminated ant is a Trojan horse that introduces the parasite into the heart of the citadel. Once they have grown to maturity, the maggots will spawn a new generation of killers.
These flies are self-sustaining biological control agents. That means that once they're established, the population grows and expands without having to release the flies every year. And they will be able to help with biological control as long as the fire ants are in the United States.
Instead of spreading insecticides, the United States plans to use biocontrol agents. The zombie flies don't upset the ecological balance. When the number of ants decreases, the flies won't have any more to eat and will die. For Operation Zombie to work, 5,000 to 10,000 flies will have to be introduced into the system because the flies are effective only across a small surface area. Fire ants have a predilection for disturbed habitats. Cemeteries, for example, where the soil is frequently turned, are full of nests. Sanford Porter carries out his experiments in the cemetery in its town of Gainesville.
One of the things that we find very exciting about these flies is even though the fire ants have been in the United States for 70 to 80 years, the fire ants recognize these flies as enemies. And it's in their genes. They have a whole variety of defenses against the flies. So we know that the flies have had enough impact on the fire ants to cause the evolution of these behaviors in the fire ants. So we're hoping that these natural enemies will be able to tilt the ecological balance so that the fire ant densities here in the United States can drop to levels like they are in South America, where fire ants largely aren't a problem.
The fire ants carrying the zombie fly larvae are reintroduced into the nest. For every fly born, there will be dozens of victims. The generation of zombies introduced into the nest by Dr. Porter has hatched. The flies are ready to attack. The zombies launch an air raid. Each fly briefly lands on the back of an ant and injects its egg into the ant's thorax. The ants emit an alarm pheromone that causes panic in the nest. Wild with fright, the worker ants stop digging and abandon the eggs and larvae. The colony founders into a state of anarchy that will be fatal to its existence.
These flies are so specific to fire ants that when they run out of fire ants, the answer is they simply die. These natural enemies will never eradicate fire ants in the United States. That is not possible, but it is possible fire ant populations can be reduced by 80 to 90%. And if we only had 1/10 the number of fire ants as we have now, we'd be much happier.
If Solenopsis invicta has been dealt a blow in its conquest of America by the zombie flies, the situation is different elsewhere in the world. Helped along by man's carelessness, the fire ant has profited like never before from the explosion of world commerce. After invading parts of Asia, the fire ant is now a major challenge for Australia. The Australian government estimates the damage done by fire ants may cost the country $43 million. Ross Wiley is an entomologist for biosecurity, an organization specialized in the fight against the fire ant invasion since the ants were first discovered in Brisbane.
The first fire ants we know came into Brisbane in 2001, and they came in as two separate introductions. There was one at the port of Brisbane, and there was one in the western parts of Brisbane. There were some ceramic pots that had been brought in from the United States, and we thought that might have been the cause. And the genetics confirm this. The genetics tells us that we did in fact get our fire ants from the southern United States, both from Texas and from Florida.
In September 2001, the government of Queensland launched an eradication campaign. Teams of specialists sprayed the ground with insecticides adapted to fight against the Solenopsis invicta. At first, the initiative seemed to be effective, but when nests outside the treated zones were discovered, disappointment reigned. The fire ants pursued their advance, applying two strategies that allowed them to persevere in the face of all obstacles.
There are two forms of the ant. There are colonies that have single queens, and we call those monogynes, and there's colonies that have got multiple queens, many queens, and we call those polygyne. Now, monogynes don't like other fire ants or other ants. They tend to live separately, but they do have queens that are strong flyers, and they can fly up 2 kilometres usually, but perhaps up to 5 or 10 kilometres. So their main dispersal is by flight.
When a nest has too many mouths to feed, newly hatched queens have to leave and find new territory. The workers follow, and thus the fire ant never ceases to increase its territory.
We have polygyne colonies. These are the multiple queens, and they get on quite well with each other, so that you can have many mounds in a small area, and that's forming almost a super colony. Now, they don't fly very far. Their queens are weak flyers or sometimes don't fly at all. So they tend to move only very short distances from the parent nest, so they spread slowly. But the danger is that because they have so many queens, they can be easily transported by man in soil movements, in pot plants, anything. They can be moved around readily. So in that sense, they're a little bit more dangerous for spread.
A single colony with several queens is what Russ Wiley calls polygyne. A nest can have several dozen. The queen's only function is to lay eggs. There may be as many as 90,000 queens on 1 hectare of territory colonized by Solenopsis invicta. Given that a queen lays 100 eggs per day, the population could grow by 9 million individuals daily. This dizzying power to multiply is a scientist's nightmare.
So we use the genetics to determine whether we have a monogyne colony or a polygyne colony. If we have a polygyne colony, then we will then do tracing, because we know that material must have moved there from somewhere, and we get our inspectors to trace back and see if they can find out where that polygyne colony came from. If we find it, then we can kill it again.
Okay, can you flag that in?
Once the trackers have found a hitherto unlisted colony, they fix its geographical coordinates with a GPS. The location is transmitted to a database that allows for precise control of the zone. The trackers take a series of samples from the colony that are analyzed by the genetics lab in Brisbane. The analysis determines whether the colony is polygyne or monogyne. Because polygyne colonies reproduce faster, they are destroyed first.
And now we're battling that third and final population, but the genetics can tell us whether there's anything else around any other populations that we haven't discovered. Hi guys.
Hi Ross.
Hi Evan. Hi Ray. Did you end up getting that sample yet from
yes, Ross,
from Gary?
Yes, we've just run it.
And you've done it already?
It's all run.
Oh wow.
As you can see, it's a polygyne nest.
Yep.
So it's very...
Finally, genetics is showing us at the moment that I think we are winning the battle, or at least getting on top of the ant, because the genetics says there's reduced genetic diversity of the ant, and this may result in reduced fitness of the ant to survive. It will not adapt as well as it could.
The success in Australia is based on the systematic controls of Brisbane and the surrounding area. Unlike the rather cautious approach in the United States, Australian policy has been to take great measures, immediately investing hundreds of millions of dollars in the fight against the fire ant.
Okay, see you.
A thermal imaging camera attached to a helicopter is used to detect nests 150 meters away. For the first time in the history of this invasion, remote sensing is now used to search and then destroy the enemy hidden underground.
The remote sensing is that we exploit the shape of a termite mound. A termite mound, by its particular shape, has got a thermal signature. In winter, it heats up, and sometimes it's about 20 degrees Celsius more than the surrounding soil. The idea behind all of this is that if we can get ahead of the ant, if we know where the edge of the infestation is, then we can start to treat from the outside. We'll be ahead of it for the first time, and then we can start to move in and kill the ant. The advantage of that for the program is going to be that we're able to cover large areas of land from the air. We can cover 750 hectares a day with remote sensing, which is much more than we could ever do on the ground with teams of people.
Perhaps surprisingly, in a country the size of Australia, remote sensing costs close to 5 times less than classic means of searching.
You had a chance to have a look at it yet?
Yeah, I started, I think, fun one, but I'm not too sure.
Okay. All right. Well, let's have
The
a
images
closer look at it
recorded
and see
by
what
the
we've done.
cameras are analyzed with an application that allows for an even more precise localization.
So with this technology, we can do probably in a couple of hours what it would have taken us, a team, 2 or 3 days to achieve. But everything is all about speed, and this will certainly enable us to do what we need to do to get ahead of the ant. What's the plans? This was completed yesterday, so we're now flying in this area.
Now that nests can be localized, the race is on. Fire ants must be left no chance to form new colonies. Ross Wiley supervises the final preparations of this eradication plan.
We had problems with the winds, very strong headwinds, so we moved across into a north.
The goal is to confine the nests and to prevent any queens from surviving.
That's it, nice and easy.
Vehicles carrying toxic products are sent to
Bring
the
it back.
terrain.
Nice and easy. Okay, that'll do ya. Okay, what we're going to do now is do a direct nest injection. What that involves is that we'll spear the nest around the outside to close off any foraging tunnel so the worker can't grab the queen and let her escape. Once we've done a nest assessment, we will then shower the whole area and flood the nest and then cover the nest back up and completely treat the nest with the chemical. Once that process has been done, we will then use all-terrain vehicles to go around and bait the area as a precaution, just to make sure that if the queen has escaped, the toxicants will then be effective and we'll kill the nest completely.
Eradicators spread granules, called pills, around each nest. Pills are coated with a substance the ants find to their liking. The workers immediately carry the granules into the nest and eat them. The queen, naturally, takes part in the feast. The active product in the pill slowly spreads through her body. In a few hours, the queen has been made sterile. Unable to reproduce, the colony is condemned to extinction. Is Solenopsis invicta, invincible in name only?
Apart from now the genetics that we've talked about and the remote sensing, the other tool that we use very much and rely on is public awareness. And some of our figures show us that in Brisbane region, for instance, 97% of people in southeast Queensland are aware of fire ants. About 50% of people say that they go out into their backyards and they look for ants and notify us if they find anything suspicious. And the other encouraging statistic is that in the last 3 years, 69% of all new findings of fire ants in southeast Queensland have come from the public.
Hello everybody, my name's Amanda and I'm from Biosecurity Queensland. How are we all today? Good. Now I've brought a very special guest along with me today.
A dog?
A dog, absolutely. Good boy, Akka! Good boy. Oh, good boy. Oh, he really likes it. I think I'm here to talk to you about today. Yes, what do you think? Fire ants.
School children in Queensland are informed of the dangers of fire ants. Their knowledge will benefit the entire economy.
Lizards and crickets as well.
We also provide training for various industries as to how they can do their own surveillance for fire ants. To do that, they need to be trained, and we would run something like 200 training courses in a year for members of the public and for people in business, and a lot of work put into what we call community engagement. We are battling the ant here, but there's always new incursions occurring and could occur in different parts of Australia. We have very tight movement controls on movement of, say, nursery stock or anything that may carry fire ants. We do not allow this to move outside what we call the restricted area.
At all ports of entry, cargo that could be carrying fire ants is put into quarantine. In Brisbane, dogs have been trained to detect the pheromones the ants emit from up to 40 meters away.
Lance, here. Here, wait.
The question of whether the fire ant is a pest or not, if you're talking seriously as a scientist or as a public official, is a complicated question. There's many different species whose good fortunes depend strictly on humans. English sparrow, rats, mice. To me, I don't think it's a pest. It's just another ant, another creature that has found an opportunity that humans make for it, and it's exploiting that opportunity. That it's not warfare, it's ecology.
Few countries are equipped to deal with such an invasion, and even fewer have the necessary budget. And yet recent studies show that half the Earth's surface could be colonized by fire ants. Solenopsis invicta is not even close to slowing its invasion. In ports all around the world, boats are waiting at the dock, ready for passengers to get on board.